I'm going to do that. I'm going to get us started on Facebook. And just give it a minute to get ready. Okay, perfect. So we are ready to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Palestine Monday series. Thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited for this month's conversation because I think it's a conversation that many of us have not always talked about or heard about or really seen in the intensity that it deserves. And so we're very lucky that Professor Mazen is here with us today to touch on this conversation. Many people really excited when we were advertising for it. So I hope you all get as much out of this conversation as we hope to. I'm just going to start us off by introducing the professor and our great speaker today that we're very excited to be hosting. And then the format for today is the professor will talk for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So if at any point you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put it on the chat, either on Zoom or Facebook, and I'll get to all of them at the end. So to get us started, it's my pleasure to be introducing Professor Mazen Koumsieh, who's the founder and volunteer director of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. The professor has published over 160 scientific papers, over 30 book chapters, and several books on topics ranging from cultural heritage to human rights, to biodiversity conservation, to cancer. He serves on the board of a number of Palestinian youth and service organizations and oversees many projects related to sustainability of human and natural communities. And so we're very lucky and excited to have you with us. It's the professor, the floor is all yours. Please take us away.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry, kind of, they shelved a bit because I have a fever and I want to test for COVID and I hope I don't have COVID. But online, you don't have to worry. So, so I'll try to be briefer than usual and skip through some slides. And hopefully have more time for you to talk. You are healthier than me. But anyways, I wanted to just briefly tell you that in Palestine, we have an environmental issue that's directly related to colonization and occupation in Palestine. And this issue is important to deal with, just as important as all the other symptoms of colonization or occupation. Palestine is very important. It's where actually humans went out of Africa to the rest of the world. And even today, birds migrate through Palestine from Eurasia to Africa. Palestine was also part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans also developed agriculture first, domesticating animals and plants like wheat, barley, lentils, etc. When people went from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, they had time on their hands, so they invented things like modern agricultural things and even the alphabet and music and law and things like that. The alphabet that we use today, actually, in both the West and the East, like the Arabic alphabet or the Latin alphabet, the ABCs, are actually derived from the old Aramaic alphabet that was prevalent some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. People still lived in agriculture up until the beginning of the Zionist project and its expansion, and especially the formation of the State of Israel in 1948. before 1948, some 70% of Palestinians lived off of subsistence farming, basically. Now less than 7% are subsistence farming. The reason for this, of course, is that their land was taken away from them and they were made refugees. And over 500 villages were demolished. You can see the map on the right with the red dots representing these villages. And out of the current population of 14 million Palestinians, only some 6 million are not refugees or displaced people. Some 8 million are refugees or displaced. This is the largest refugee population on earth still today. And but it has not stopped and it continues. And the land of the Palestinians continue to be taken. As happened with North America, actually, the shrinking map of Palestine was inspired to be drawn by my son, actually, in 1998, when he saw the shrinking map of the US below. These areas that are in so far continue to shrink, and today they are 8.3% of the land, which is actually worse than what was under apartheid in South Africa, when the blacks were relegated to so-called Bantustans, and the Bantustans were about 11.5% of the land of South Africa. This is what's called settler colonialism, and that's the proper name for this that we have, this diagnosis. And of course, you know, we can talk about symptoms ad infinitum about settler colonialism, but I think you all are familiar with these symptoms, from the violence, from the ethnic cleansing, the murders of native people. This picture, this drawing is from the US, actually, showing how the settlers technology development and how the natives basically are running away into the wilderness, what's left of it, together with the animals, the buffaloes, etc. Of course, settler colonialism has environmental impact. In North America, for example, 2 to 3 million buffaloes were killed to deprive the natives of their livelihood. And here in Palestine, of colonialism that impacts the environment. For example, when the villages were destroyed that I mentioned, their trees were uprooted, all sorts of trees, diverse community of subsistence agriculture, including almonds, figs, olives, hawthorns, and carob trees were basically bulldozed. And in many of those old village areas, the new state of Israel planted pine trees. The problem with these pine trees, of course, is that they have susceptibility to burn, and also they're not natural and good for biodiversity. Colonialism, in terms of diagnosis, need to be looked at also in terms of therapy and prognosis. Prognosis is very easy. You know, you have one of models or scenarios, either the Algerian model, which you are familiar with, or the genocide model as happened in the US and Australia, or the coexistence model. The last model, this coexistence model, where descendants of the colonized and the colonizers live in one country. That's found in most countries on earth, actually. And it's a most likely outcome. So it's a most likely prognosis, so to speak. Look, I said about the symptoms of this. symptoms of problems and greed in the world are very wide, and I don't have time to go through them. But you know, we are in trouble as a species. We have declining habitats. I mean, the UN has uh, countries around the world. They identified the 5 major threats that humanity faces, like climate change, pollution, invasive species, overexploitation, and other things. We can add, of course, settler colonialism to these threats. But all these threats, no matter how you classify them or look at them, they're very clearly a result of a wrong ideology, a wrong philosophy that guides certain individuals to think of themselves as bosses and get rich. The billionaires get more billions, and the poor get poorer, and the environment suffers. This is because of greed, and underlying human frailty, if you want. These are the trees that were burned, forests that burned in West Jerusalem just this past summer. It was basically an ethnically cleansed Palestinian village that Israel destroyed its trees and everything and planted this monoculture of pine trees, which are more susceptible to fire. Ironically, when the fire happened, it exposed the terraces that the Palestinians before 1948 had used and has planted in diverse trees. But we can talk about endless symptoms and both elements, the killing, the murders, etc. But I want to focus on the environmental aspects. And so in the environmental issues, settler colonialism here, like settler colonialism in South Africa or United States or anywhere else, had impact on the environment. In our case, it has unique features. For example, diversion of the water of the Jordan Valley, like the drying of the wetlands of the whole, significant habitat destruction, depriving not only people of their livelihood, but livelihood of other organisms that share this area with us. There is also the natural resource misallocation or stealing of natural resources. For example, natural gas off the coast that's taken by Israel, including off the coast of Gaza. And this is the major reason that Gaza is besieged, basically, is because of the natural gas off the coast of Gaza. In terms of water as a natural resource, also it is stolen, basically, and Palestinians end up having less than the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living, while Israeli colonial settlers, they have much more water that they see from. On local level, we can see areas like this, which is just behind me here, Jabal Abu Ghanim, which used to be forested, and then it turned to a Jewish-only colony or settlement beginning in 1997. There's a genotoxic dumping of chemicals on the people of places like Brooklyn that results in DNA damage and chromosome breaks. Some of my students have thesis on such topics as environmental devastation due to colonialism. If we look at these things in terms of symptomology, symptomology can be a bit painful whenever we have such things. So when I look at 2021, We saw that 86 Palestinian children are killed. There was colonization between Israel and some Arab countries. There was a failure of civil society to push their governments enough to change the greedy situation that results in habitat destruction. For example, at COP26, Convention of Parties for the Climate Change in Glasgow, Israel banned human rights groups like the Union of Arab Women's Committees and Children's Committee, Defense of Children International, Palestine branch, prisoner advocacy and legal support for human rights organizations. There's continued settlement building and continued funding of war crimes and crimes against humanity, basically. Sometimes people are surprised at what these symptoms can lead to. Here's one example. On January 6, 2021, basically we opened the year with a massive rally in Washington, D.C. that turned into a riot, basically. Ironically, in this riot, well, not ironically, actually, expectedly, I would say, in this rally, there were Israeli flags, American flags, Confederate flags, and also racist, anti-Semitic and other T-shirts and flags. The reason I say it's not actually unexpected, because birds of a feather flock together, so to speak. So racists actually, converged on the U.S. Capitol. Whether those racists are ones who support racism against Palestinians or racism against Black or Native Americans. I'm in Bethlehem now. I'm speaking to you from Bethlehem. We just had our Christmas, so to speak. I say Bethlehem is like all Palestinian towns and cities, is besieged, and it is a Bantustan that people have to, getting in and out of it is not a simple process. So if Jesus was, or Joseph and Mary were coming to Bethlehem today, they would have a lot of difficulties. Okay, I mean, I don't want to depress you too much. I'm depressed myself about the situation today, but what is it that we can do? Well, for one thing, we can and we should stop being part of the group of lemmings that's heading off to the cliff. Howard Zinn wrote a book called You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train. And, the US is basically as a country, inside human rights violations, war crimes, etc. And we are complicit because we pay taxes. I say we, by the way, because I'm also a US citizen and I do pay taxes, even though I left the US in 2008. So what we have to do is stand up and say, enough, stop, stop, let's wake up, let's think about this. We can't give up because it's an existential struggle for all of us. And I mean for all of us, because humanity is in danger. The Palestinians who are being targeted, who are like the, sacrificial lamb that's being thrown under the bus as Israel continues to expand and have hegemony in the Middle East. So what we can do and how we can go forward. So we talked about, the diagnosis as settler colonialism. We talked about things related to environmental issues, and we talked about prognosis, which is most likely one democratic state for all its people. What did that leave? That leaves a therapy. How are we going to actually get there if you want. And I think, I've been, of course, struggling with this question all my life, determining what's the best for me to do and what area should I work and what action should I do. Ultimately, after all, we can only affect our own behavior. And so we should start with ourselves. So I, for one, decided that this is more recent, in 2013, 2014, I decided to focus on research, education, conservation by forming the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. The idea of this institute is basically sustainable human and natural communities along the lines of the sustainable development goals, which everybody agrees to, but very few people implement actually globally. And there's this notion of ego and greed and so forth, to unity, to support each other, etc. Now, why did I say research, education, conservation in that order? Well, research is essential because you cannot do education, conservation if you don't have good research, if you don't have good data that you can use for education and conservation. Our institute has about a 3 or 4 acre position, which has a museum, a building in the middle with solar panels. You can see it has greenhouses. It has botanical garden. It is sort of like a center, an oasis, if you want, in the middle of an area of conflict. This oasis, which attracts children of all ages from 3 to 93, if you want, is set up in a way that works for what it's intended to, which is to create an environment for education, for conservation, and for research, of course. So we have Museum of Natural History. We have a section of it that's ethnography, history of agriculture, use of all the agricultural tools, etc. We also produce educational modules like on climate change, presented videos or posters and brochures. We work with people of all backgrounds, Christian, Muslims, even Jews here. And we try to promote sustainability, for example, with farmers. As you see here, this is some of our work with the farmers to increase their productivity, increase food sovereignty. The museum itself has models that help that, like the aquaponic systems, and we show people how to build those. We even brought some people from Gaza one time, and unfortunately, to get them the permits to leave the ghetto or the Bantustan of Gaza to come to Bethlehem and learn how to build an aquaponic system. We also have a community garden, and children, again, of all ages can come plant some things if they choose to and produce some foods, etc. We work with women cooperatives to enhance their basically ability to be self-sustaining, have food sovereignty. This is from the summer camps last summer, where children come and enjoy themselves in nature. They make all sorts of things. They do it by hand, recycling and material. We believe in the old Chinese saying, I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we want them to do things by hand so that they understand and they reconnect to nature. So you can see here some of the children enjoying the playground, the exploration area, touching, feeling, etc. These are some kindergarten kids learning about butterflies. Our programs are for all ages and all backgrounds. We have programs also for women empowerment, for example, using organic plants and others to create household products, including cosmetics and things like that. We human natural communities. So we also have an animal rehabilitation unit, and this animal rehabilitation unit releases wildlife when we can actually help some species, some animals that are injured or hunted or things like that. The people here work together, they enjoy themselves. There's a lot of resources we have developed. We have developed a biodiversity center, research facilities. Our staff work on various areas. They succeed because we have partners and volunteers and donors from around the world. We even got grants from National Geographic Society, British Council, Royal Society, and many, many others, EU, of course, and so on. We also set up an informal network called Planet, which lobbies governments and things like that on issues of environmentalism, like the UN Climate Change Conference. We're also now working on the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which is for the first time being produced as a major strategy locally by local people, being us, in other words. And this is important, what we are doing here. Basically lighting a candle instead of cursing the dark, if you want. And with that, we work with all people, all backgrounds. Our staff are mostly young people, you can see here. Jesse and I are the oldest there. But we are not staff, actually. Jesse and I are volunteers. We even donated our money to build this institute, money that I saved when I was at Palestine University, $250,000 to start with as a initial funding for this institute. And now we volunteer almost 17 hours a day, daily, and never have vacations or anything. In fact, it's midnight now here in our time, so I'm with you. We have a lot of volunteers who do very good job, some of them international. For example, this guy, Julius Pal, who's operating our drone, and which is, of course, Israel doesn't allow us to have drones, but we have it. And he published a paper on the orchids of Palestine, and now he's doing a higher degree on conservation of orchids. If you are interested to come and help us as a volunteer, we provide room and board, and you will enjoy working with other people of all backgrounds. You can see here, for example, the volunteers who built our biogas system in the upper right-hand corner, or volunteers working in the garden, or doing taxidermy, or or simply just enjoying themselves, cooking and eating together. We have a lot of ambitions for this institute. This is what we hope it will look like. In a few years, we will have more facilities, more infrastructure. So this is our website, palestinenature.org. You're welcome to check it out. We have videos there also, which you can see and explore in various areas. I think I'll stop here. As I said, I went fairly quickly, and sorry about my voice, but I'll stop the video also because you see me. But thank you very much, Abir, and everybody for your interest in this, and I'm happy to discuss what you guys think is can be done or should be done. And some of you I know from before, and it's good to see you guys. And
Thank
thanks.
you. Thanks for sharing all that amazing work that you all are doing. I just want to echo some of the comments in the chat about how amazing the museum is, and just all of the work that you all are doing in this institute. I did put the link to support the work of the institute, and so the specific donation link and the museum. Just please make sure you click that you're specifically supporting the museum in that link. I think that's the least that we can do as folks here and in the US to support you all. There are a couple questions from the chat, so I will read them, and then I have some questions also specific to just the environment and the effects. But I do want to point out two things that caught my eye from your presentation. One, I've never heard anyone talk about settler colonialism as a prognosis and symptoms, and I love that. I actually think that's a great framework that I want to use in the future. So thank you for sharing that. I also want to point out some of the visuals from Visualizing Palestine. So if anyone does want some more resources of information or infographics to talk about the environmental effects of colonization, and specifically what's happening now in Palestine, Visualizing Palestine is I think it's just visualizingpalestine.com or .org, and you can get a lot of those infographics. But so to get to a question in the chat, do you have any foreign students that are engaged in your programs?
Sorry, Julius was an intern. We got some interns from Germany. It's very difficult. One of the problems, of course, is that we're under Israeli occupation, so all visitors, students or otherwise, have to go through Israeli border controls. And if Israel finds out that they are coming to either study or volunteer or help in Palestine, they will deny them entry, basically.
Yeah.
So most of them have to come only as so-called tourists, and tell the Israelis at the border they're coming as tourists. So we had the decline in international visitors during the COVID-19. Still, it's lingering. Hopefully this is being lifted soon, the restrictions and so forth. But even when it goes back to pre-COVID days, it will still be very restricted by the Israelis in terms of the ability of people to come. And as I said, they have to just tell the Israelis that they are tourists visiting holy sites or something. So that's, unfortunately, we live under a very unusual, even healthcare workers or volunteers in hospitals are denied entry here. But we would welcome anybody who wants to come and try it and get through. They can stay for a while, and they benefit a lot for their own career, actually, including publishing papers with us and things like that. And we provide room and board for all visitors, students, etc., who work with us. So you would be more than welcome if people want to come.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe we have, PAC has a program called the Homeland Project, where we try to send people to Palestine every month. Every month, I wish, every year, every summer, to visit and to learn, from on the ground. And so maybe we've also been dealing with restriction issues, COVID and all the other stuff. But maybe if we get a group out there, we'll definitely contact you all and see if we can make that part of the trip. I have a question about just environmental justice as a framework and Palestine within that framework. And so I'm sure there's a lot of what is called the progressive except for Palestine, especially in the United States, right? Where we're very progressive on a lot of social justice issues or decolonial issues, but Palestine is somehow either deliberately or just unconsciously left out of that conversation. We see it a lot when we're talking about indigeneity or just social justice in general, and especially in environmental justice conversation. And so I'm wondering if what are any advice or ways that you think you pointed some out in your presentation, but ways that we can kind of make sure we insert Palestine in the environmental justice conversations and see it, see the colonization of Palestine as an environmental justice issue. And then the other way around too is a lot of folks in our community, are like, that's the last thing on my mind right now, which understand, people are trying to survive and there's a bunch of other things going on, but how can we also get our community members more interested in the environmental justice conversation and make those direct links to what's happening in Palestine right now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I like people to do is to start to expand their horizon, their knowledge, and their ability to talk to fellow, citizens in their countries, not in terms of, see those poor Palestinians, let's go help them or something. To me, that's not a major issue. I mean, when I think 1980, I was a young person who didn't know much about the world. And the first action I took politically was for South Africa, not for Palestine. I was then a student at the University of Connecticut, and I was elected to be head of the International Student Club, which is basically a club for international students at that university. And this black guy comes to me and says, what are you going to do about South Africa? And I was so naive, I didn't know anything. And I said, I don't know anything about South Africa. Would you educate me? And he did. And then the way we approached it and the way we presented it to fellow students was not about those poor African people that are suffering under apartheid. No, what we talked about is how apartheid in South Africa, there's like war crimes and crimes against humanity that are being supported by our country, by the US, by the Western world. Every single country in the West, was supportive of apartheid. While at the same time, the leaders of those countries were speaking about human rights and international law. So South Africa was kind of the Achilles heel of Western hypocrisy. And we utilized that. That's why we were successful at mobilizing boycott, divestment, sanctions against South Africa. And now we're doing the same thing for Palestine. We're doing it because it's good for humanity, not because of those, solidarity with the poor Palestinians. I think it has to do with the human sanity and human logic of what we are doing. And the fact that the US government is the biggest sponsor of this. The US government is not this neutral observer from afar. The US government is the one that funds apartheid here, that funds home demolition, that funds destruction of people's lives, using our tax money. And then our government also, the US government, basically uses its veto power at the UN to shield Israel from international law. So as I mentioned, Howard Zinn once wrote a book called You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train. So we have to get off this train, and this is good for the US. It's not just good for Palestinians and obviously for Israelis who are also victims of Zionism. But I think it's good for American citizens and for people around the world. For example, the US, like 4 trillion, keep track of the number, keeps going up, 24 trillion in debt. Half of this, and that means on debt on the people, on the American public, half of this debt is due to these endless wars that the US supports in the Middle East or engages in the Middle East on behalf of Zionism, not on behalf of American public interest or what's good for Americans, or even if you're an imperialist, what's good for American companies that profit are weapons companies like Halliburton and Motors, etc. But not in terms of the companies that, let's say, oil companies or something like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate, we don't want the white savior complex in any right framework. And so I think that that's a framework that all of us can use for sure. I want to kind of continue talking about why the colonization of Palestine is not just harm for Palestinians, but the environment and all of us. Can you talk a little bit about like the specifics of how the control of resources or, the confiscating of land or the destruction of olive trees, just kind of more specifically, like what is the day-to-day effect and the larger environmental effect of that on Palestinians and just the world in general?
Well, I mean, I could talk endlessly about this, but let's take an example. Let's take Gaza. Gaza is 2.2 million Palestinians. Most of them are refugees or displaced people kicked out of their land in 1948 areas and are squeezed into this semi-arid area, which has been deprived of its own natural resources. For example, wet gas was flowing from the mountains of Hebron all the way to the Mediterranean coast on Gaza was blocked by Israel. And so the water level, the water aquifer in Gaza is being depleted and is becoming non-usable. So Gaza is actually 97, 98% of its water is not drinkable, and there's very little of it left. Literally, there's genocide happening in Gaza, an environmental genocide. This is caused directly by colonial system and methodically. And there's a woman professor at Harvard, Sarah Roy, who wrote a book called De-Development in Gaza, how Israel basically de-develops the community and destroys the community. And then, of course, restricting Gaza people from fishing their own sea, basically, and stealing the natural gas off of Gaza and besieging Gaza so that they cannot come in or out. Even basic medicine sometimes. The last thing I read from actually an Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, says that some 90% of requests by Gaza residents to leave to get medical treatment abroad, either in Egypt or even Israel, 10% of those requests are denied. And then the other 10%, many of them are extorted, basically collaborate with Israel. If they are going to leave to get medical treatment, they have to show that they're willing to help Israel somehow by collaborating, by being snitches on their neighbors and things like that. And the UN said that Gaza is unlivable. As of last year, actually, Gaza is unlivable. So what is the world doing about this? Nothing. The US continues to give Israel billions and billions of dollars and continues to shield it from international law. That is why it's a responsibility of citizens around the world to mobilize and change this situation.
Yeah, I think that's there's a comment in the chat about the help of Egypt too in the deprivation of just Gaza's prosperity. And and everyday life. And I think that what you mentioned is a good reminder that, you know, apartheid and occupation is not just about political or, you know, control or land. It's also about the way of life, right? And not having a sustainable way of life, not having a, you know, being able to think of a future and prosperity. And so those are really important factors of occupation that we often forget about too. And so that's a great reminder of them. I know that it's really late for you and that you aren't feeling well. And I just really appreciate that you were still doing this conversation with us. I want to give folks just a chance for any last minute questions or comments. I see that you put your email in the chat. So I'm assuming, is that for if folks want to continue to have these conversations or get in touch with you? Thank you. So the professor's email is in the chat. If anyone does have any last minute questions or comments, please put them in now. But in the meantime, I do, again, just on behalf of us at PAC and just everyone, I want to thank you for all of the work that you do and for taking the time to share this work with us also. I know it's not easy, and so we appreciate everything that you all do. And if there are any ways that we can support, again, I put the donation link in the chat, but if there are any other ways that we can support or just help, please let us know. If anyone wants to stay connected about these conversations or do more to spread awareness about these conversations, please feel free to email me. I can also put my email in the chat because I think these are important conversations that we have to continue and hopefully see something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that people can do on my website, which I can also find the link for it, kumsiya.org, but on that there's a link for what people can do. There's like 71 ways that you can help, from boycott, divestment, sanctions, to media work, to speaking to your own government.
Yeah.
Sometimes on mundane things that people don't even think about. For example, this targeting the human rights organizations here and claiming that they're closing them because of terrorist connections, when in reality they couldn't produce one shred of evidence that there's any terrorism connected to these human rights organizations. You can write to your congressman, congresswoman about these subjects and say, you know, the European Union found that these organizations, which the EU also funded, have nothing to do with terrorism. So why are they being banned? Because they protect children, they protect women, they protect prisoners' rights, etc. This is not fair. And I think you know, the more people work on these issues, the better off that we will be. I just put that link, what you can do in there. So there are many, many ways, and these are just 71 ways that are there that I put. That's 200. Sometimes you act in the way that you are most comfortable with. If you're a musician, you can even use music for resistance. If you're interested in media, you can lobby media, you can write letters to editors or op-eds and things like that. If you're inclined to agriculture, come and work with us, or plant. But even in your own community, you can do that. You can show people that they can plant things and produce things, and that they need to stop using plastics and things like that, fossil fuels. So there are many ways that people can act and should act, and I encourage you to act. The problems we face is, by the way, as always, you know, the small minority that do evil things get away with it because the large majority is apathetic and sitting around not doing anything. And the changing in society happens not because we are the majority who are acting or become the majority. No, it's usually a minority, and this minority of activists if they increase their activism, sometimes from 1% of the population to 2% of the population, then they can get change in society. And if you look in American history, what are the positive things that happened and how they happened? They all happened like that, with some activists, and not became a majority, but became stronger than the other small minority, which is the greedy minority. So that's how we got the women's right to vote. That's how we got to end the war in Vietnam. That's how we got the US government to stop supporting apartheid South Africa. That's how we got 40-hour work week. That's how we got, all these good things that we consider good things, social security, etc., civil rights. They happen because people stand together and act.
Yeah.
And action is good, healthy for us.
Yeah, and that's a great reminder of the power of collective action. And I like the on one of your slides, I think it was like, it's not about the ego and myself, it's about all of us and what we all can achieve together. So I think that's a great reminder to end us off with. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for doing this so late and while you weren't feeling too well. We really appreciate it. Hopefully we stay in touch. Hopefully our center can, somehow collaborate with your center. I'm definitely going to add the resources. For those of you who don't know, PAC has a Palestine resource guide with books, articles, video, everything you need to learn about Palestine, and this is definitely going to get added to it. There was also a question in the chat about sending these links. If you do want these links emailed to you, please just email me and I'll send them to you. I put my email in the chat. I can put it again. But again, thank you so much, Professor Mazen. Best of luck with everything else, and we'll stay in touch. Hopefully.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Take care. Good night.
Bye.